Today is Sunday, August 11th, and this is Celtics Beat on the CLNS Media Network, the leading online provider of audio-video coverage of the Boston Celtics. I'm Adam Kaufman, back with you. Episode 327, featuring CLNS Celtics beat writer Scott Souza, is brought to you by betonline.ag. Use the promo code CLNS50 to get a 50% bonus on your first deposit of $55 or more. Well, it is mid-August, so until the Celtics, I guess, make a Kyrie Irving-level trade like they did about this time 2 summers ago, I think we can go back to calling this the dead spot in the NBA calendar. Welcome, everyone, into Celtics Beat. Adam Kaufman here with you, and thanks to Evan Valenti for pinch-hitting for me last weekend. I was actually having surgery. I'd love to tell you it was something elective, like a nose job to make me prettier, but I had to have my gallbladder out, which was about as painful as it was annoying. Nevertheless, I'm not going to bore you with those details. I'm back until the next time I'm off, so we've got a show, and that's great. I'm not alone. I never am. We bring in CLNS Celtics beat guy Scott Souza, who, of course, has been on this show before, does an excellent job. You read his work. You should be at the CLNS page, and seeing him all over doing video stuff as well. And Scott, it's good to, I don't know, maybe hopefully it's good for you to be able to talk a little Celtics in the dead of summer.
Yeah, I'm sure it's, well, I'm glad to be here with you. I'm glad you recovered from your gallbladder surgery. I thought the Kyrie Irving experience was tough last spring, but looks like you've had a little bit of a rougher run, so sorry about that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, no, I think actually watching Kyrie over the course of the last 2 years, not watching him, he's elite to watch, but sifting through all that was the Kyrie Irving experience, I'd take the gallbladder surgery.
It was the gallbladder surgery of being a Boston Celtics fan, yes. That's a good way to sum up the Kyrie Irving experience. I don't know if that'll fit on the banner on the rafters that's supposed to have his number that will never be worn again. But
yeah, I mean, not by him, but Enes Kanter, maybe it'll be never. After that, we could put it up for him. Seems to be what he wants anyway.
I don't know if that's going to happen, but sure.
Hey,
makes for a good punchline.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I appreciate him taking that little jab there as well during his introductory press conference. But the biggest story in the NBA world right now, and it's not a huge story, but it is what is dominating the association, is Team USA camp. More than a dozen Americans competing for 12 spots on the World Cup roster that'll battle in China starting September 1st. Obviously, everyone trying to make a great impression in Las Vegas for next year's Olympic roster and on to Los Angeles, even though most of that group, by the way, is going to be comprised of the team that is largely taking this summer off. So I guess as the expression goes, more for us. And what I mean by that is Team USA, as Marcus Smart has said, is kind of like Team Shamrock in this moment. 4 Celtics players competing for spots, Scott, including All-Star Kemba Walker, future All-Stars in my mind, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and the Heart Star, Marcus Smart, as I said. They've all spoken at some point over the last week to NBC Sports Boston. They've got crews out there. Smart is currently sidelined indefinitely with calf tightness, if anybody missed that. Time will tell if that'll actually prevent him from making this team, but he has such a unique skill set. Bob Ryan was on this show a couple weeks back and raved about Smart, as he always does, and why he belongs on that team. I can't imagine Greg Popovich and Steve Kerr need to evaluate him in drills to decide whether to include him on that final roster. But what do you think? For Smart in particular, how does this play out?
I mean, I think it's a nice benefit for him. I mean, with so many people pulling out, it's interesting to have the Team Shamrock thing, the USA Celtics, but, in the end, making this World Cup team is going to be kind of like being the valedictorian of summer school at some level because, a lot of the top guys aren't there, and a lot of these guys are not going to be under serious, if Steph Curry's available and Kevin Durant's available and some of the other top players in the world are available, then, you're probably not going to see a Jaylen Brown or a Marcus Smart in serious contention for a spot in the Olympics next year. But it's a good experience for them. And one of the things that, I thought when looking at it as a whole, and you hold your breath a little bit when you have an injury like Marcus Smart's, and I guess it's not going to be that big of a deal. He's just going to miss a couple of weeks to rest it. But, you wonder how this plays out over the course of a season, because a lot of the guys who are pulling out aren't pulling out because they don't love their country or they don't want to compete. They're pulling out because they want to be ready for the NBA season. And the Celtics are putting in a lot of effort here in the middle of the summer when it's not benefiting the Celtics. It's going to be benefiting themselves and benefiting Team USA, which of course is great. But one of the things I think you can take away from it a little bit is the benefits of having this team with Kemba Walker and some of the younger guys, and Gordon Hayward's not out there, but a theoretically healthier Gordon Hayward and not having a guy like Kyrie Irving and not even having a guy like Al Horford, who a lot of us were big fans of, is you've kind of gotten beyond the heavy load restriction era of the Celtics, where you have to worry about guys who are going to be constricted to 26, 28 minutes a game, guys who are going to be sitting on the second nights of back-to-backs. I have a feeling that Brad Stevens will want to tail back Kemba Walker a little bit as he moves, further on into his 30s in terms of being a guy who signed for 4 years and being a guy who's already played a lot of minutes in this league. But he's a guy who doesn't miss games, and obviously the younger guys want to play as much as they can. So I think that's one of the things that you take away from this is that you're not looking at a team this year that you necessarily have to try to nurse them through 8 months of the regular season in the hopes that they'll be ready for the playoffs. This is a team of mostly players, if not all players, who will be able to go night in and night out.
Brad Stevens talked about the fact that he's really excited these four guys are in camp together and have this opportunity, not only together, as you talked about, and kind of getting to know each other, and we'll build upon that, but the fact that they're able to learn from other great minds in the league. Like, of course, he singled out Greg Popovich, and we know that he's something of a mentor to Brad, but Coach K is there, Steve Kerr is there, some other coaches are there, Jeff Van Gundy is there. There are a whole bunch of guys there that people can learn from. So Stevens, unlike where Stevens said that, or Danny Ainge both said that they didn't mind Kyrie Irving going to the All-Star game after missing games right before that break. That was kind of lip service and trying to keep Kyrie happy. I think Brad is genuine in being happy that his guys are there, even, with that potential injury risk on the line. And as we saw with Marcus, hopefully nothing serious, but the fact that these guys are there. But if you're a Celtics fan, on the other side of that, do you want all these guys there? Which is better? Is it better to be there and build that chemistry, or are you just so fearful of, like what we saw a few years back with Paul George and suffering a serious injury in one of these camps with Team USA, and it cost him, obviously, an entire year and then some to be himself again?
I think what you might be most fearful of, based on Kyrie Irving's experience at the All-Star game, is some hallway YouTube footage of Becky Hammond with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown saying 2 max contracts.
Right.
That might be the
as long as they're saying it to each other,
that really get you going. But no, I mean, those are freak injuries, and those things might happen. I mean, it's not like these guys aren't going to play basketball
right
in the off season. You have to play, you have to improve. An injury like Gordon Hayward, you're not going to say, well, he shouldn't have been playing in the opener. He shouldn't have gone up for an alley-oop. You're not going to blame Kyrie Irving. You're not even going to blame Jay Crowder for that situation. It's just something that happened. It's something that happens to Paul George. It's something that could happen to them. It's something that could happen to Jason Tatum if he's out working with Kobe Bryant. Maybe taking a step back mid-range jump shots, probably a little bit less taxing on your body if you take 100 of those a day that he's not supposed to take in a game than driving to the basket and flushing them home. But if these are the types of things that you're going to want these guys to develop and do for you next season, then they're going to have to do them in the All-Star. Then they're going to have to do them in the off-season. And, at some point there's a risk you take anytime you put on the sneakers. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. I think it's more, if they were slightly older guys, some wear and tear on their body. Now, if this is something that Marcus Smart decides to try to play through because he wants to impress people in September and then it comes back and gets them in November, well, then you can start having some second guesses because some of the guys who've pulled out have pointed to kind of minor injuries or things that they want to get healed up at the beginning of training camp. If the Celtics are taking this so seriously that they're putting regular season games in doubt, then maybe that's when you have to step in. But short of that, I think it's an overall good experience, and it's something to get people excited about for this team.
Well, I'm going to give you, Scott, and our listeners as well a string of sound of these guys talking over the last few days because they have chatted a fair amount about this training camp, about Boston's future, each other, and like I said, a lot. And Smart, for one, big on the bonding amongst his C's teammates.
It feels good, just to build that camaraderie right now, early on in this, before the season even starts. So when we do finally get on the court, when it's time to strap it on for the season, we kind of already got a hint of what everybody wants to do in the field for everybody.
Smart also believes that all that bonding right now could actually help take Boston to a special place later on.
Everybody know, when championship teams or contenders are really great teams, they have a special to them where you look and you like, them guys, they've been together for a while, or, those guys really know how to play well with one another, and that's all we're just trying to build.
As for Jaylen Brown, he's just happy to turn the page after last year's dysfunction.
I mean, we can only be positive. Last year, I can't see it being any worse than that, so coming out and being positive is is everybody's mindset.
One more here. Brad Stevens actually said, because this dysfunction, it's a popular topic right now because inevitably you put cameras, reporters in front of these guys, that's going to come up. What happened last year? Brad Stevens said that turning the page, that actually happened a long time ago.
It's funny because I think on the outside, because there's not much to talk about for 2 months in the summer, that's kind of been a consistent story. And the inside, we moved on past it a long time ago. And so it's been a great vibe in our building. We have a great group of workers. Jalen and Jason are here, but they were in Boston last week working all the way up until this point. Obviously, we've had a ton of our young guys through. We turned that page a long time ago. That's what you should do after a season. I think whether you had success or it wasn't as good as you want, you learn from it and you move on.
So, Scott, let's be positive, and we've already chatted a little bit about how beneficial this training camp experience can be for these four men. How important is it, though, for the positive vibes, just to put everybody in the right mindset going into the new year?
It's kind of interesting because when I was hearing them talk about, Brad Stevens talk about we turned the page a long time ago, according to Danny Ainge at the Kemba Walker press conference, it appeared he felt that Kyrie Irving turned the corner back
Mid-season.
in March or April.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of the guys, it's kind of interesting. I wrote, they lost Game 5 against Milwaukee, and then for the listeners who don't know, the next day, they fly back to Boston. They kind of have like an exit interview day, which is at the Auerbach Center. And the season's technically over for the players, so they don't have to talk. So some of them don't talk. A lot of the players who spoke the night before in Milwaukee didn't talk, so it's kind of an optional thing. But we all go down there and we see if we can get some, parting thoughts going into the off season. And the thing that I wrote out of that day was that, if you really want to recapture the moral center of what you want with the Celtics, the guys you look for, and this was before we knew about Kemba Walker, the guys that you could put the team in the hands of would be Marcus Smart and Jaylen Brown in terms of future leadership. Now, I'm a big Jaylen Brown fan. I know there are people that are still a little divided on him in terms of what his ceiling is. He's a headstrong guy. It's not surprisingly that maybe over time he butted heads with Kyrie Irving. I think history proved Jaylen Brown to be on the right side of that history a little bit more. If you could read through the lines a little bit, if you could read through the lines, I think you look back and you would see the things that they kind of said throughout the year, and you would say, Jaylen Brown probably had the clearest idea, yet also handled his role on the team from an outside perspective or even from an inside the locker room perspective, not being part of the team the best in terms of, overcoming a hand injury and taking on a role that you probably didn't want to have as much, but, excelling in it by the end of the season, being possibly their second best player over the second half of the season. So, I think those are two guys that you definitely build around. Now, Kemba Walker is a guy who has an exemplary reputation, so now you have three guys in that situation. I don't think that Gordon Hayward is necessarily that leadership figure. He didn't show much of that last year. He's kind of a quiet guy who was off to the side. A lot of times did not want to talk after he struggled in games, kind of left quietly. So he's not a guy who necessarily wants to be at the forefront, especially if things aren't going really well. And Jason Tatum is not much of a talker that we all know. Anybody who's done an interview with Jason Tatum or I know you've probably tried to sift through 2.5 minutes of Jason Tatum trying to find a soundbite to be able to play on the show, and you come up with maybe 7 seconds worth of sound that might be sort of interesting.
Yeah.
I think Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart and Kemba Walker really are those guys moving forward, both for this team and this franchise. And, them being together in the summer kind of shows that. But, it's interesting that that's played out that way and that you played that sound because the day after the season, I wrote that for CLNS in terms of, if you want to get back what you thought your moral compass was, then Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart would be the direction that I would have turned to. And apparently the Celtics feel the same way.
Those four guys, Scott, that are in that training camp for Team USA right now, if there's one Celts player this helps most, all this time together for the four of them, who do you think it is? Is it Kemba Walker just to gain familiarity with the other three, or is it one of the others?
I'm going to say that it's Jaylen Brown just because, Marcus Smart is going to be the type of player he is. I don't think that anything that happens out there is necessarily going to open a window up to him, becoming a 20-point-a-game all-star. He's always going to be the type of player who he is. Kemba Walker is already the player that he is, and you hope that he continues to be the player that he was last year for Charlotte with Boston this year. I think it's basically Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum in terms of being guys who, have that ceiling, can still grow, can still see where their game can take them. Now, there's the perception out there, and a lot of people feel this, that Jason Tatum has that higher ceiling. This might be in the best situation for Jaylen Brown to say, he belongs in that category, not only of, one of the, Olympic or hopefuls for the United States or one of the World Cup guys for the United States, but also a guy who, does have that all-star, is thought of as that potential future all-star. It may not help the Celtics in terms of reaching a contract extension with him over the next year or so, but in terms of him seeing what his ceiling is, then this may be a good tool for that.
Do you think all four of these guys will make the U.S. roster? Of course, I'm talking about the World Cup roster, not the Olympic one.
Perhaps. I don't know. I haven't really, number crunched it that much. I mean, obviously Kemba Walker will be there. I have a feeling in the end Marcus Smart may not be there just because of, if this injury lingers on or whatever, then, that might not be something he follows through. Again, I think the ones that will be most interesting to see would be Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown.
Let's talk some more about these guys. Smart has said a lot since the end of the year. He's done various interviews. I thought he was great when he was on The Jump on ESPN a week or two back, and just how things went wrong and how to turn the corner and all of that. I tweeted this a few days ago, and I've said this for a while, and I know that you're a big Smart guy as well. He's obviously the vocal and emotional leader for this team. Other veterans, Al Horford used to talk about it all the time. Kyrie to an extent as well. He's a rising vet. He's been around for a little while. He's the longest tenured Celtics player. He's under contract, for a few more years. He's all-NBA defender, consistently works his butt off. I'm just wondering, and I guess I feel like I know the answer, but I'll ask the question anyway. How long before Brad Stevens caves on this no captains policy and gives Marcus the C? Because he is the de facto captain of this team.
Yeah, that one's an interesting one. I know it's been brought up a couple of times. I don't necessarily know that he needs to see. I think a lot of people, look at him. Again, going back to what we were just talking about, I think the way I phrased it in that article is, Marcus Smart is the heart of the team, and Jaylen Brown might be the head of the team in terms of the brains of the team. Now, you're not going to take Jaylen Brown over Marcus in that situation because he's got a little more tenure, but he certainly would be a worthy captain. But I can see Brad Stevens looking back over the years and kind of have how the captain thing was kind of thrust upon him in terms of Rajon Rondo almost demanding to be named the captain and them acquiescing to that and how poorly that went to, kind of maybe we're just not going to go there. We're trying to move on from the Rajon Rondos of the world. We're trying to move on from the Kyrie Irvings of the world. I'm sure there was a time that Isaiah Thomas wanted to be named the captain on some level, whether he actually vocalized it or not. If we're going with this collective idea, maybe we do go with that a little bit more and a little bit longer anyways and kind of see how things play out. So I don't necessarily know that a ceremonial C does much for Marcus Smart. I think it's more showing by example what he does on a day in and day out basis. And Brad Stevens is always, he talks about the winning plays thing all the time. And Brad Stevens has these little phrases that he uses, constantly that you guys have heard, the best version of myself, and he makes winning plays and everything else. But Marcus Smart's really embraced that. And I'm pretty sure that at the beginning of the film session, when you show hustle plays and putting your body on the line, Marcus Smart owns the bulk of that video session, and that's as close to a C during the team film work that you probably need.
In general, do you think captains matter in basketball the way they do in hockey or in football with obviously several captains, or do you think it's kind of more symbolic like those baseball teams that have them and it's just not that important?
Yeah, I don't really see how they matter. I mean, obviously they matter in hockey because they have a practical purpose, and in football, they go out for the coin flip. But in basketball and baseball, I think to tell you the truth, I couldn't tell you who I couldn't even tell you for most of the NBA teams whether they even have captains.
Right.
As far as I know, the Red Sox last captain was Jason Varitek. I don't know if they
likewise.
I don't think they have one since then. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think it's been a big deal in Celtics history, and I think that's why it comes up a little bit more often because the Celtics, they're always Larry Bird's team, and then they were, Reggie Lewis had the C for a while, and then Paul Pierce obviously had it for a long time, and Rajon Rondo, again, basically demanded it, which isn't really the way you should be named a captain, I don't think. It's not like a high school girls soccer team where the players have a vote, and then the coaches are going to sit in a room and be like, well, do we give them the real vote, or do we give them the vote that we want to give them for next year? and you have two high school juniors crying in the bathroom because they weren't named captain when they thought they were going to be named captain. It is largely symbolic. I think the players who command the room are the players who command the room. And last year there clearly was not enough of that. And, and Marcus Smart was a Kyrie guy last year. I don't think he butted heads. I don't think he necessarily bristled back at Kyrie that much. Not that, maybe in his mind you wanted it all to work out. And I think Marcus Smart's one of those guys who thought that eventually, and he said this after the season, thought that eventually it would come together at some point and the team would be able to make that run. And, Kyrie Irving would be happy in Boston on some level, but it didn't happen. So guys that, were kind of hoping for that or misread that situation, they kind of have to own that a little bit, whether it's Marcus Smart or whether it was Al Horford not doing a little bit more to be proactive in that, or even Brad Stevens as a coach not being able to solve that. Obviously, we know how Jaylen Brown felt about it. We know how Terry Rozier felt about it. So I think it's one of those things that just evolved. Being named a captain doesn't really serve much purpose to me.
This feels like sort of a stupid question to ask, but I will. When the season rolls around, how important is it to get off to a strong start? And I don't mean that for the sake of the standings, but for really putting last year's problems in the rearview mirror and building some early confidence in the room with this group.
I think it's probably going to be. I mean, we don't know what the schedule looks like. For all we know, they could be playing 10 of their first 13 games on the road or any of that type of thing.
Right.
But I think this year this team will get off to a better start just because they have. They will have been playing all the way through. They're not going to take even though there's a lot of new. There's a big new guy in Kemba Walker. I think it will come together more quickly than it might for some of these other teams that are trying to, incorporate newer guys. Toronto's going to be trying to play without Kawhi Leonard, even though he did sit for large stretches of last year. The Sixers are going to be trying to incorporate Al Horford in a situation where, they were, had Jimmy Butler doing a lot of things last year, and now they got to work out that. You still have Al Horford and Joel Embiid probably sitting out games at the beginning. This season, this team should be able to hit the ground running a little bit faster than last year. We've heard Danny Ainge speak over and over again that Gordon Hayward, was there right after the end of the season, showing up at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, did not go back to San Diego this summer where his family, had always kind of gone back for the summer. He decided to stay in Boston, at least for the first half of the summer. I think it's been pretty much straight through, although I don't know for that for sure. So you've had guys together, and you've obviously had guys in Vegas. So I think they probably will get off to a good start. Whether in the end it's going to matter in terms of whether they make the Eastern Conference Finals or not, I don't know. But I think for perception's sake and for fan interest sake, if they get off to a 12-4 start and they're sitting, within a game of the top of the Eastern Conference, people start to get a little bit more excited about the team rather than say, okay, well, yeah, it's great that we have a likable team again, but they're 8-8 and they're going to be fighting for the 6th seed.
One quick break to tell you that today's show is brought to you by BetOnline.ag. Now, basketball clearly in its dead zone, but doesn't mean you can't win money on the NBA or college hoops. Both seasons have title odds already. Clippers, Lakers, they lead the pack in the NBA, plus 350, plus 400 respectively. The Celtics are plus 1,600 to win a title. It's a little rough, but plus 300 to win the division, far more realistic. And while basketball season waits, baseball season is in full swing, and placing a wager on baseball, that's never been easier with all the best odds at betonline.ag. This week, I'm watching Red Sox Indians. They're trying to get better position for the AL wild card. The season is not lost for the defending champs. I realize the division is out of the question. The East ain't happening, but the wild card, second wild card spot in particular, that is still possible. Still have to worry about the Rays, the A's. They're right there in the hunt. The Indians, they're not going anywhere unless it's booting the Twins into a wild card spot and taking over the division. It's an uphill battle for the Sox. I know, but it's not out of the question. So when it comes to betting, why wait? And can you believe the NFL preseason? That's underway. Patriots won their first game. They got another one coming up in about a week. To celebrate another season kickoff, betonline.ag and CLNS Media teaming up to give you 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Head over to betonline.ag or use your mobile device to join today and use promo code CLNS50 to receive your welcome bonus. Don't sit on the sidelines this football season. Get into all the action with betonline.ag, your online sportsbook experts. Minimum $55 deposit is required. Please see BetOnline's general rules for additional terms and conditions. So the upcoming season, as every year is important, obviously, but you can make the case it's maybe particularly important for a variety of guys. There's Kemba Walker trying to establish himself in Boston in year one. Jason Tatum, of course, looking to prove that year two was more of a fluke and that he is still building and can be that all-NBA guy so many of us believe he can. Jaylen Brown is chasing maybe max money when he's a restricted free agent. That discussion has been out there a little bit. Gordon Hayward, of course, looking to show he's Utah Gordon again and fully recovered. The injury's totally behind him. You have Marcus Smart, maybe wants to showcase his improving shot, but even better, take more steps off of where he was last year. You could talk about Robert Williams wanting to show people that he's a legit starting NBA center and that he can be part of Boston's real future and not just kind of another guy that they took a mid to late round flyer on. The list goes on. So for which player do you think is this year most significant if you had to pick one?
Can I pick a non-player? I'm going to say that the guy that I think we want to see a lot of coming out of the gates this season is Brad Stevens.
True.
He did not have a good year last year, and you can say it was Kyrie's fault and that he was given a poorly constructed team by Danny Ainge, and he didn't do enough to fix that. But, at the head of the list in terms of guys who, let's be honest, failed last year, and Brad Stevens has acknowledged this, was Brad Stevens in terms of having the most talented team that he's ever had at any level in basketball and dramatically underachieving. Again, I'm not, I'm not putting it all on him in terms of saying, fault, but in terms of a guy who you would, if you graded out his season last year, you would have to give Brad Stevens a C- maybe, or a D even, in terms of what he was able to produce given the expectation. So, he's a guy that now he has more of a Brad Stevens type team, right? He's got Kemba Walker, a guy who's a team first guy, a guy who's, not going to want to make it all about him. He's got young guys that he's groomed over the last couple of years, that he's developed over the last couple of years himself. He has Marcus Smart, who is his first number one draft pick. Remember, Brad Stevens was hired after the Kelly Olynyk pick.
Mm-hmm.
Marcus Smart was the first guy that he had a chance to pick. These are all his guys with his personality. And, you go back to a little bit of the Butler, the little engine that could team. You go back a little bit to the, Isaiah Thomas team that, made the Eastern Conference Finals before Isaiah's injury kind of overtook him. You go back to the team that got to Game 7 without Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward. I didn't even mention Gordon Hayward. Obviously, that's the number one Brad Stevens product in the whole situation is Gordon Hayward. So I think what Brad Stevens can do with his team back is going to be one of the more interesting things to start the season, because we know the talent that Kemba Walker has. He was third-team All-NBA in Charlotte, so he's a 20-point-a-game guy. He's an all-star. Jason Tatum should be on the verge of being an all-star within the next couple of years. Jaylen Brown has all-star potential. Gordon Hayward, it's still going to be determined a little bit how he comes back from that injury and whether he is really ever the Team USA player that he was broken ankle, catastrophic injury. But how Brad Stevens is able to, regain the locker room and pull some of those switches or flip some of those switches to turn this team, which is not the most talented team in the NBA, not the most talented team in the Eastern Conference, into an Eastern Conference contender, I think is one of the most fascinating aspects of this upcoming year.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I guess to that point, too, it's, a lot of people, I don't think anyway, have really questioned Brad Stevens' ability to coach. One of the areas that he was really flawed and the team was flawed last year, and he hasn't had beyond last year and maybe the year before an opportunity to really prove this, and this is another situation where he can, is one thing Doc Rivers was so good at and continues to be so good at, and we'll see what happens with the Clippers now that they've added a couple of superstars, is obviously the ability to manage egos and manage players off the floor. That's something that is not the check mark in Brad's column just yet overall when he's got the diva-type guys. You can go back to Rondo. That was another guy that he couldn't necessarily get fully on the same page with. So that in mind, with so many guys, much like last year, still looking to eat, still looking to prove something, whether that's financially or about their future or what have you, could we see another situation like last year where even with less talent on this roster, there isn't enough sacrifice, enough buy-in from the group?
Yeah, I think that's going to be, that's up to the coach to set the tone. It goes back to the players, and Kemba Walker can set that example probably better than Kyrie Irving. Marcus Smart's always going to be that type of player. You don't have Terry Rozier, who is probably the most disgruntled guy last year anymore. But you do have, you get Brown and Tatum, who are guys who, on some level, Jaylen Brown he is being compared, and he's always been compared to the guys around him in the top five. And he's always said the right thing in terms of, I had the opportunity to come into a winning team. I had an opportunity to come into a contending team. So I had the advantage that, maybe a Jamal Murray, a guy that he's compared to a lot, who's now a guy who gets, $20 million more contract out there. A guy who's scoring 20 points a game. He gets compared to those guys, but he's never had the opportunity to be that guy. If he thinks he has to be that guy this year and he's going out and taking 20 shots a game and he's not hitting them, that's up to the coach to be able to develop his players. And this was always the strong suit of Brad Stevens before last year. He was able to take guys and accentuate their strengths and make their star brighter than maybe it otherwise would have been, whether it be Isaiah Thomas or whether it be Evan Turner or whether it be Jay Crowder. Avery Bradley had career years under Brad Stevens. So I think it can be done. I think these guys can fulfill their potential and gain their, increase their star power while also being part of that team structure. But that's part of why you have what many consider to be one of the best coaches in the game, the guy who can do that under the right structure in the locker room, keep that even keel, but also, put players in the best position to succeed, both team-wise and for themselves. And that's what Brad Stevens' charge is this year.
Hell, even Crawford got an Eastern Conference Player of the Week once, if I remember right, and he didn't even belong in the NBA.
Phil Pressey was in the league for 4 years because of Brad Stevens.
That's true.
He's a 5'9" guy who shot 31% from the floor, and Brad Stevens had a winning record with him as his starting point guard.
So Kemba Walker, let's talk more about him, and let's hear from him also, because he's choosing to look at last year's Celtics failures as maybe a good thing, or at least he's looking for the bright side.
Probably good for those guys to have, that down. You can't always be in the high. So I think for them, last season and, their struggles and things like that, I think that's motivation for them, coming into this season. So I think they're ready. I think they're ready to, work, which they've been doing, and, just ready to take their games to a whole other level, especially because of last season. That's how it was for me.
How do you expect Kemba to handle the expectations of replacing Kyrie Irving, thriving in Boston's system as point guards have, like Kyrie and Isaiah Thomas did under Brad Stevens, and he talked about that as being one of the real draws to Boston, playing for Brad. And, unlike in Charlotte, obviously, playing for a team where the playoffs aren't merely a goal, it's a baseline.
Yeah, in Charlotte, if you made the playoffs with that team, then everybody thought you should be. That's what you start getting chanted MVP.
Yeah, build a statue
down there for the 12,000 people that might actually be there. But this would be an interesting thing for Kemba Walker. Is he, with this contract, does he come in here and think, and from all indications, he is the ultimate team guy, and he is not necessarily a guy who needs that glory, needs the ball in his hand at all times. What we've heard from people who have known him for a long time, that have covered him in Charlotte, national people, is that, he took as many shots as he did last year because he had to take as many shots as he did last year, because that was the only chance that Charlotte had to win. And we saw what it did against the Celtics. It did win against the Celtics. And, maybe if Brad Stevens had double teamed him like everybody else in the NBA did, then maybe the Celtics would have held on in a couple of those games. But whether he's serious about coming in here and incorporating everybody else, Kyrie Irving talked a good game about doing that. And then when it came time to do it, he didn't actually do it. Most people believe that Kemba Walker will do it. I think one of the things that'll be interesting with him is, what type of a facilitator he will really be. He's kind of, because he's been such a volume shooter, he's kind of been more of a 5-6 assist guy. Will he be able to set up Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and to some extent, even Enes Kanter, working in the two-man game there that you saw with Kyrie and Al Horford in the past. I think they have high expectations for that. We know that he can get his shots. Will he be able to set other people up for shots? Now, one thing that I think you may see a little bit more of this year is Marcus Smart as a point guard. I thought he was a very effective point guard last year in terms of, I always thought he's had one of the most underrated things about Marcus Smart's game is his court vision. He has a strong handle, but he has excellent court vision for a point guard, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him, whether he's a starter or coming off the bench, maybe playing that one a little bit more and playing Kemba off the ball a little bit more, and maybe even to a certain extent as a backup to that situation, Carson Edwards behind Kemba, to try to get them open to be able to score, but also maybe put the onus on Marcus Smart from time to time to say, okay, you have to be able to set up Jaylen and Jason and not put all of that on Kemba Walker. But just to go back to his fit in Boston, everybody you talk to, thinks this guy's a great character guy, the ultimate character guy. Now will the greater spotlight kind of show a few warts that maybe you didn't see down in Charlotte? That's always a possibility. We haven't really seen here, because of the injury, whether that was the case with Gordon Hayward. We don't know whether if Gordon Hayward had been healthy that whole season, whether we would have seen aspects of Gordon Hayward's game that maybe we didn't realize when he was out in Utah. I know there were people out in Utah that say, he's not quite as good as you guys think he is from afar. That he chucks up a lot of ill-advised shots, that he misses a lot, and things of that nature. Will we start to see that? Will we see the Kemba Walker 43% shooting percentage a little bit more glaringly when we watch it every night than when we see him play in Charlotte and he puts up 45 points against the Celtics and they come back from down 20 in the fourth quarter because the Celtics team can't get along?
Well, getting back to Tatum, we were joking about the fact that it's hard to find a soundbite from him. I managed to find one, Scott. He chatted with NBC Sports Boston, said he's kind of tired of talking about last year, both about himself and the team.
All my stats were better. I did better, just not the jump that I expected or the rest of the world expected, which I should have known. The team, the dynamic that we had, everybody we had so many guys, so many talented people, trying to win a championship. Everybody had to sacrifice and step back a little bit, but it didn't work. Last year is behind us. Everybody kind of tired of talking about last season. We got a new team, new guys, so we're just trying to move on and get ready for next season.
So his stats didn't actually get better. I mean, some of the volume numbers did, marginally, but his shooting splits, overall efficiency, those got worse. So I think he's a little misguided with the way he's talking about that. I think he and so many players around the league are a little too obsessed with their NBA 2K ratings and all of that. But clearly, and this is good, he has high expectations for himself, Scott. So how much pressure do you think he's putting on himself in year 3?
I think it'd be good if he did put some pressure on himself. I don't know that he necessarily put enough pressure on himself last year. I think he thought maybe so much was made of the dunk on LeBron James and his working with Kobe Bryant, and you probably had, Kyrie Irving. He and Kyrie Irving were close. I mean, they were the Duke guys. They worked together a lot. Probably the closest person Kyrie had on the team, I would imagine. He got along with Marcus Smart pretty well too. But so in that way, I think he thought maybe last year that he arrived. It'd be good to see if he does put a little pressure on himself to do the things to improve upon the games where he can still improve upon. I mean, he's already, I believe he is already an elite scorer in the NBA. I'll even say that. He can score the basketball with just about anybody, but he has got to be able to do it in the right situation. He's got to be able to know, when to shoot the outside shot, when to drive the basket, and when he drives the basket, he can't lose the handle out of can't lose his handle out of bounds all the time like he did last year. He can't complain for fouls like he did all last year. He can't not be able to finish at the rim. That's a common thing that you see for players in their first and second year. Jaylen Brown had a lot of trouble with that early on in his career, but generally you get a little bit bigger, you get a little bit more used to the game. You can finish at the rim better. You can, when to dunk the ball and when to lay it in. And then defensively, I think a lot of times, to me, that's where Jason Tatum, really took a step back last year in terms of being engaged defensively. We all know that he, from his rookie year, he has the athletic ability, he has the size, he has the length to be able to be an impact defensive player, to be able to guard 2 or 3 different positions, depending on who he switched off of. But last year, too many times I thought he was passive in that situation, or he got caught looking, or, he was one of those guys that you felt if his, we heard this a lot last year, but he was one of those guys, probably maybe the guy on the team who, if his shot wasn't falling, then it showed up on the other end of the court in terms of giving up a defensive play that he shouldn't have given up. So he's just I think he's going to have to mature as a player with his outlook, because obviously the inherent skill is there.
Well, he said he wants to be more vocal this year. Do you think he's ready to take on a leadership role beyond everything you just talked about on the floor, off the floor, and in that locker room and among the other guys, and getting everyone on the same page and getting them together? He's a young guy, clearly. I mean, he's barely old enough to drink, but is he ready to be a leader? I
mean, I haven't really seen any. I mean, you never know who these guys are just when it's them hanging around, but I haven't seen any indication that he's ever commanded a room. He kind of again, either jokes around with his teammates or he kind of hangs out by himself in the locker room. Again, if I was to look for leaders, I mean, everybody leads in their own way, and Danny Ainge will say this, and Brad Stevens will say this. Danny Ainge had that, they're good, everybody leads. There's just good ways to lead and bad ways to lead, and that was one of the things that was perceived as a shot at Kyrie Irving, one of the many things over that stretch that was perceived as a shot at Kyrie Irving. So I think he has a role to to show maturity and to show leadership, but I don't necessarily think that he is going to be, you would never think about saying, well, maybe the captain of this team should really be Jason Tatum. That's
right.
I think that type of thing is going to be Kemba Walker, as we talked about earlier in the podcast here. Kemba Walker, Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown. I think Jason Tatum's charge is going to be attention to detail and keeping that focus at all times on, again, another one of those Brad Stevens things, but making the right basketball play. We know you can score. We know that if you really, want to fire up a bunch of shots, you can improve your, as you mentioned, volume stats over last year, whether they're most efficient, whether they are the most efficient stats or not. But it's making the right basketball play on both ends of the court that'll, really separate him in terms of being a guy that you can build around as a cornerstone superstar for this team going in the years ahead.
With our last couple minutes here, Scott, let's talk about guys we haven't even mentioned yet, and those are the rookies. Carson Edwards, Grant Williams, they both tossed out the first pitch at Fenway Tuesday night and told Nesson that Boston fans have made an early impression.
I would probably say the one thing that I've heard multiple times since I've been here is just if you play hard, they'll love you. So that's one thing. They're passionate, and if I give everything, they'll support me.
They show a lot of love. They're there for you. Honestly, I've been here for less than 3 days, and I've met so many tremendous people that have made an impact on my life from the start. So I'm just excited to get started and be able to play in the Garden and be able to see events like these and see the Red Sox play the Kansas City Royals, see so many talented players, because coming off of a World Series like we won last year, it's a great city to play in.
So a couple things. One, I've said this, people know this. If you follow me on Twitter or you listen to this show, you know this going back to draft night. I love Grant Williams. I love everything about this kid. And I love as well that he said we, referring to the Red Sox winning a World Series. He's bought in, and that's terrific. If you're projecting ahead, which C's rookie do you think is going to have the biggest role out of the gate when the season begins? Now, I would assume Williams, but maybe after what we saw in Summer League and knowing what his potential is as kind of a microwave guy off the bench, you're more of an Edwards guy.
Yeah, I'm definitely much more of an Edwards guy. He was a guy that, even going into the draft, and I understand, a 6'1" guy who's not really a true point guard kind of falls into an interesting category, but I was stunned throughout the entire draft process when his name was showing up, coming off of that NCAA tournament. And he had some tough shooting stretches of the season too. He was already a junior, so he wasn't one of those, freshmen coming out, which kind of dominate the first round, but that he was, kind of pegged in that middle of the second round. And, I started, we all put our thoughts on Twitter because we don't know exactly what's going on, but we kind of, give our, during the draft, kind of, what might be coming up, what they should be thinking. I was saying from the middle of the first round on, with those picks in the 20s, depending on how many they wound up keeping, they wound up keeping one of them. But then they got the extra pick that they took Carson Edwards with. He was a guy that, and this was before they had Kemba Walker, of course, but he was a guy that I thought they should definitely target, that any team in the 20s should target in terms of a guy who performed at that level in the NCAA tournament. And, he does have measurables. He's a 6'1" guy or 6 foot guy, but he's not a small guy. I mean, you stand next to him, you can picture him, being the Patriots' third down back out of the backfield. I mean, this guy's got some bulk to him. He's got presence to him. It was interesting when we were at that press conference when all the rookies showed up. He was the guy that, even though he was the third player taken out of that group, he was definitely the one that had the juice in the room. He was the guy, and I wrote about this that day. He was the guy that everybody was looking at. He was the guy that everybody was talking about in terms of, what he did as a college player. And they were all complimentary of each other, but he was the star of that room. And I think you saw in Summer League that, some of that star power, might carry over a little bit quicker. Not to say that he's going to be an NBA All-Star as a rookie, but, I think he is a guy who's going to have an immediate impact for the Celtics. As far as some of the other guys, Langford, he's obviously lost some time during the summer, and I think he still has to develop a little bit. There's some question about his shot from last year. Obviously, he probably maybe has the highest ceiling because the Celtics went with him in the middle of the first round out of anybody. But, I think he may be more of a long-term prospect. And Grant Williams is kind of an interesting guy. Obviously, he's a great guy to talk to, a great guy to listen to. But we've had those guys in the past. Ryan Gomes was a guy like that. I'm still curious with Grant Williams how his game translates to the NBA. I know he took some more outside shots during Summer League. He had that ridiculous plus-minus that everybody pointed to, like the greatest plus-minus in the history of the Summer League. But when it comes to an actual NBA game, who can he guard? Who does he guard? How does he score? He is, maybe it's the style of Tennessee, but he was a 6'8" guy who played in the post. How long will it take him to kind of transfer that game to the pros? I think that may be a little bit tougher than some people are forecasting. So my pick out of the rookies, obviously we're not entertaining Taco Fall in this conversation. My pick out of the rookies would be Carson Edwards to make the biggest impact.
Yeah, we aren't entertaining Taco Fall, but we are always entertained by Taco Fall. And, of course, I'd love to see him on this roster. Bob Ryan, who, again, was on a couple weeks ago, basically said he would be personally offended if Taco Fall is not signed by the Celtics to this roster and actually see some NBA time. He's that high on the guy. We won't talk about Taco, but I will take you out with this. Chris Forsberg asked Brad Stevens all about just the Taco hype, and I think this is the first time we've really heard Brad talk about him.
Well, I think the hype, again, is there's 2 months of nothing to talk about, so you guys have to fill the airwaves, right? So, but he's a special kid. He's a neat guy. He's smart. He's self-aware. He's just got a lot of good qualities about him. I really enjoy him. I had a chance to sit down with him at a meal and spend a little bit of just individual time with him. And he's a really enjoyable guy. And, so we all appreciate those opportunities for our own kind of time where we can just get away from everything. I don't know that he ever can, right? Because he's 7'7", and everybody knows when he walks in the building. And, I really appreciate who he is as a person, how graceful he is in handling that.
And we hope to see if he's in fact graceful at all on the NBA floor. We'll see. But Scott Souza, I really appreciate you taking the time as always and sharing all your insights here. I know there are a lot of different things that people even still want to hear about in mid-August concerning this team, and so I'm glad we're able to give that to them.
Certainly. Thank you very much for having me on, Adam.
Absolutely. Scott Souza, CLNS Celtics beat writer. You can see him, of course, not only in the videos on the CLNS YouTube page, where a lot of our sound generally comes from as well. You should subscribe if you haven't, but you can read his work, most importantly, as he's out there each and every game. Excellent stuff from Scott Souza, and, he's obviously been on the beat for a long, long time at a variety of outlets, and if you aren't aware of him somehow, some way, and I don't even know how that's possible, because, again, he's done such a good job for so long and has been part of this show before, does a lot of great work. You should read it. A couple things I didn't have time to get to with him that I'll just mention in passing as we wrap up this show. Kevin Durant told Yahoo Sports he and Kyrie Irving did not plan to sign up and play together. Just, it happened. And I don't know. Why even bother lying about this? They were both free agents. They had the right to team up. They did. Why hide from it? We all know how these super teams are formed. There's just no point. I guess you don't want to get caught in a situation where you look like you've given up or quit on your team mid-season like Kyrie Irving, or collusion or tampering, or not that player on player is tampering, but, don't give the commissioner's office or anybody else any more ammo because everybody knows this is a problem. The other thing, though, that's just really cool, has no impact on the Celtics whatsoever, but Vince Carter re-signed with the Hawks for one final season. He's 42 years old. He's going to play an NBA record 22nd year. Now, Dirk Nowitzki, Kevin Garnett, Kevin Willis, Robert Parrish, they each played 21. So 22, new NBA record. Again, it's going to be his last year. Plus, and this is just neat, this is nothing more than timing. You don't have control over this sort of thing, just sort of lucked into it, I guess. But after debuting in 1998, once Carter plays a game in 2020, come January, assuming he's not hurt or something, he will be the first player in NBA history to appear in a game in 4 different decades. That is something that, I don't think we're going to see another guy like Vince Carter again. I don't think there's a guy in the league right now who's going to play 22 years. The closest I think is Pau Gasol, who is at maybe 18, 19 at this point. Udonis Haslem just re-signed. He's in that 17, 18 ballpark. I just don't see these guys hanging on as long as Vince Carter, because Carter, not only is he still playing as an active, he plays. He still sees some minutes. It's not like a Haslem or even a Gasol who's playing like 10 or 12 minutes. Carter still has a role beyond just mentoring guys. He's not a star, clearly, but he still has a role. And so, the man's still throwing down dunks. I hope he plays forever. I hope it's not his last season. But I don't think we're going to see another guy play this long for a long, long time anyway. Maybe someone who's in the league right now, but has a ways to go to get there. Unless LeBron decides to hang on that long. He could, depending on how long he wants to wait and then eventually play with Bronny. That could happen. But at the moment, Vince Carter's in a class of his own. As are you listeners for paying attention to Celtics Beat. We always appreciate it. And, of course, this show brought to you by betonline.ag. Use the promo code CLNS50 to get a 50% bonus on your first deposit of $55 or more. So thanks again to Scott for joining us, producer Evan Valenti. It's good the two of us are working together again this week after a couple weeks of separation. Thanks to Nick, Larry, John, everybody at CLNS Media, and, of course, most of all, you. We always welcome your feedback. You can get me on Twitter at Adam M. Kaufman. If you like the shows, you want more, we're always thinking about that. Leave ratings, leave reviews on iTunes. You can hit me on Twitter, give us feedback there. Good decades. That is something that I don't think we're going to see another guy like Vince Carter again. I don't think there's a guy in the league right now who's going to play 22 years. The closest I think is Pau Gasol, who is at maybe 18, 19 at this point. Udonis Haslem just re-signed. He's in that 17, 18 ballpark. I just don't see these guys hanging on as long as Vince Carter, because Carter, not only is he still playing as an active, he plays. He still sees some minutes. It's not like a Haslem or even a Gasol who's playing like 10 or 12 minutes. Carter still has a role beyond just mentoring guys. He's not a star, clearly, but he still has a role. And so, the man's still throwing down dunks. I hope he plays forever. I hope it's not his last season. But I don't think we're going to see another guy